This year has seen a resurgence in home gardens, and I've seen it from the number of questions that I get. Because of that, I thought it might be a good idea for us to do a little review of some of the past shows that we've done, and that begins at the McHugh Garden Center in Woburn. A lot of garden centers break their yard down into different plants. So your perennials are in one location, your shrubs are in a different location, your flowers, annuals are in a different location. So as we're walking through, you see that these are all perennial plants. Now what a perennial plant is something that comes back every year. So it will come out of the ground, it will grow, it will produce flowers, it will die back in the fall, and then the following year it will return. That is a perennial. See that? That's one of my favorite signs. Shade-loving annual. First of all, an annual is a plant that grows, it completes its life cycle in one growing season. That means it grows, it blooms, it sets seed, it dies, and it doesn't come back again. It's not a plant that returns annually. It's one growing season, 1 year, and it's done. One of the things that the nurseries do is they bring in plants with flowers already in bloom. These are grown in the greenhouse and forced to bloom before they come out to the nurseries. And the idea is they know that you will not purchase the plants if you don't see the flowers. But if you see the flowers and it's your favorite color or your favorite plant, then you'll purchase it. Your job is to take this home and immediately remove the spent blooms. It's called deadheading. So you remove all the dead flowers. This will encourage the plant to produce new flowers. And it will continue to bloom all summer long as you continue to deadhead. The idea is to try to determine the amount of sunlight you have, the location you're putting the plant in. That will dictate the type of plant that you want. Are you looking for height? Are you looking for spread? All of that is determined on your walking around your yard to see what you have. Sunlight exposure, is it in the shade? Is it growing under other trees? Things like that will dictate what you purchase.
Regardless of what you're planting, it starts from the ground up with the soil.
By just saying potting mix, what that means is everything in here is organic, all mixed in, there's no soil. This, which is a garden soil, you'll find that it has sand, silt, and clay. You already have sand, silt, and clay in your yard. You don't need to invest money buying more sand, silt, and clay. So you don't want a potting soil or any topsoil, you want a potting mix. Compost or your peat moss or your bovine manure, which is cow manure. Those are the best things to incorporate into the soil. You dig the hole, put it in, incorporate it with a tilling fork, and then put your plant in. The best word a gardener can hear is free. And the best item you have for free in your garden is yard waste. This turns into compost, which feeds the microbes in the soil, and the microbes in the soil take care of the plants. Composting at home keeps this yard waste out of the waste management system, which is great for the environment and great for the town. So let's talk a little bit about composting. What a great summer this has been. Very wet, very hot, and the warm season plants are loving it, especially the weeds. But that's okay, because behind my raspberry bushes, I've got a gold mine. I'm not talking about the gold raspberries, I'm talking about brown gold, compost. And that's where these guys are going, into the compost pile. I have 2 compost piles. I don't turn them. I cold compost. That means I just keep throwing stuff on top of the compost pile and let the microbes do the work. In this pile alone, by the time this decomposes, there'll be hundreds of trillions. That's a T. That's a 1 with 12 zeros. Hundreds of trillions of microbes, and they are all beneficial to our plants. That's why I compost. Anything from the garden, anything. They call it greens and browns, call it what you want. Anything you pick from the garden should go in the compost pile. You have stems like this, just chop away. That's all you need to do and you're done. In the kitchen, paper towels, egg crates, lint from the dryer, coffee filters, tea bags, eggshells, throw it all in there. Even if you got rounds, dump them in. It's all going to decompose. I have a spring pile and a fall pile. This is the fall pile. So what happened here is all during the winter, I kept throwing items in here. So last fall, when the irises, all the herbaceous perennials died back, they got thrown in here, all the dead material. And it sat here all winter, adding to it, adding to it, adding to it. In August, I'll harvest this. And I'll take the stuff that didn't decompose, and I'll move it to the top. And under here is the compost. So this is the material that I'll harvest and put into the vegetable gardens where they'll overwinter. All the microbes will get to know each other, get together, do what they do during the winter, and then go to sleep. And then in the spring, I'll come back and I'll harvest the other compost bin. So every 6 months, I'm harvesting from a bin. Easy peasy. The added benefit of composting is the finished product, which is great for the soil and great for the plants. This quickly absorbs and holds the water and makes it available to the plants, which in total reduces the amount of water you need to use in the garden. Next time somebody asks you why you grow vegetables at home, show them this. If they were to say to you, well, what's the big deal? I can buy asparagus that size at the supermarket. Well, then show them this. You can't buy these at the supermarket. I planted this asparagus bed 4 years ago, and I have never watered it in all 4 years. It's a perennial, it was planted, I prepared the soil, put the mulch down, and walked away. I haven't done anything here for 4 years. You need to focus on and understand your soil. That's the first rule of water conservation, know your soil. So here we have 3 soils. We have a clay soil, this is sand, and then this is a sandy soil containing organic material. So let's just take a quick look. If I pour water, it just sits there. And it takes a long time for it to get absorbed by the soil, but in the meantime, it's going to run off away from where you're trying to water. If you have just a sandy soil, the water quickly disappears into the soil. If you have a soil with a lot of organic matter, then the water will go in. This disappeared immediately. This went right in and is being absorbed by the organic material that's in the soil. This is still sitting there. So if you plant in something like this, you're making a big mistake, and it's going to take you forever to get this soil wet, and you're going to waste a lot of water in the process. So this is what you're trying to accomplish. The other thing is invest in a rain barrel. This is something you could purchase from the town of Burlington. It collects the rain, it fills up. This is 50-something gallons. It collects the rain, it fills up, pour it out as needed. This all normally would just be wasted and go into the soil, but if you have the rain barrel, you can save it and use it on your container plants. You can make your own. I have another rain barrel behind me that I made from an old barrel and a couple of dollars in some plastic fittings, and I have another rain barrel. One other thing to look at is your hose connections and your spigots and everything around the house. You hook everything up, you get it all set up, you need to check for water loss. And I have a situation here where this fitting is leaking. So if I turn it on, you see the water coming out? That's wasted water. The only thing that's getting wet here is a pile of soil with nothing growing on it. You don't have to go out and spend $35 for new hose. All you need to do is spend $1 for a replacement coupling and put it on the hose. I receive a lot of questions about how to make my lawn greener. Why can't my lawn look like my neighbor's lawn? How do I get a nice plush dark green lawn? And I keep saying, why bother? You need a ton of water. Why don't you do what I did and dig up the lawn and get rid of it? This used to be a big area of grass. I could never get it to grow nice, so I finally said to heck with it. I took all the grass, I moved it to the center, of the area to create these planting beds. I let the grass decompose in place. Then I brought in some plants, used some compost, incorporated into the planting area, put the plants in, put the mulch down to reduce evaporation. I don't water out here now. I never come out here with a garden hose. This is all operating on its own. This is now 2 years in the making. I'll continue to put some perennial flowers in here, but this is it. No watering, no fertilizer, no pesticides. Well, 10 years ago, I went down to visit my brother-in-law, and when I pulled up to his yard, I saw in the whole front planting area, he had fencing around every single shrub and bush, and I had a real laugh about it. And I said, "What, Jack, what's going on?" He said, "I got rabbits, they're eating everything, and that's the only way I can stop them." I thought that was the funniest thing I ever saw until this year, where now I'm doing the same thing. The biggest thing people think about right away is fencing. I'll just keep the woodchucks and everybody out, and that's great. But fencing comes in all different shapes and sizes, and they don't all work for everybody. For instance, this is fencing specifically for rabbits. The idea is these slots are very small and the rabbits can't get through. Well, that's great, but it only goes up to about 1 foot in height, and immediately above there is this big, nice 4-inch square. So this by itself doesn't solve the problem. And then you've got this nice decorative fencing that comes in 2, 3, 4, 5 feet of height. It's a 2-inch by 4-inch square. That'll keep out adult rabbits, but it won't stop the baby rabbits or chipmunks or squirrels from getting into the garden. So these by themselves aren't the solution. Then there's poultry fencing, also known as chicken wire. So let's take a look at what I do. Now, as crazy as this seems, I use everything, multiple defenses, starting with this plastic fencing. This is just flimsy plastic, which helps deter the woodchuck from climbing in. As the woodchuck climbs, the plastic collapses and the woodchuck can't get over the fence. Behind that, I have the poultry fencing, which keeps these smaller baby rabbits from getting in. And then beneath that, I have this black plastic strip. And the idea behind this, which is remarkable to me, is it makes the garden invisible. It's a stealth garden. So if you put yourself at rabbit height, going past this pathway, you can't see the vegetables that are growing in the garden. So let's talk a little bit about the insects and diseases in the garden. First of all, understand that plants are more than capable of taking care of themselves. They have built-in defenses that they've developed for over 2 billion years. It's our responsibility to give them an environment where they can grow and be healthy, and they'll take care of themselves. Also, when we're talking about insects and bugs and diseases, the reality is that more than 50% of those pests in the yard are good guys that go and kill the bad bugs. It's just our job to help them. So one of the things that I do is what I call a feels good spray. It's liquid dish detergent in ammonia. You mix it in a hose end sprayer. It works out to 1/4 cup of each to a gallon of water, but then you spray the whole yard with it. What we're talking about is something that breaks up the magnetic bond with the water molecules that helps the water permeate into the soil and not run off. That's what the detergent does. Whenever you spray any kind of pesticide, fertilizers, anything like that, you should be using this to help the plants. The ammonia is a very, very mild fungicide. It's nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen mixed with a little bit of water, diluted with water. So there's not a lot of chemical here at all, and it's all, we'll say, natural. So it's a nice, low, one step up in the organic pesticide management system where you're pulling the bugs off the plants and it cleans it. So I do this every couple of weeks just to keep the plants clean. That's all you need to do to address your insects and diseases. So now that we're halfway through the season, it's time to start getting ready for your second crop. In the pea bed, I'm going to put a second crop of lettuce. I'm going to plant some beets and do a little turnip. And before I plant, I'm going to take all that nice free compost that I made and top dress the beds, rake it all out, and then I'll plant. So the best thing you can do for your spring plants in your flower beds is to clean the beds up in the fall. This is a peony. I'm going to chop it all up. This will help the microbes in the compost pile eat them a lot quicker. All of this becomes a blanket over the winter. And that's where the bad guys will hole up over the winter. Right now, when it gets cold during the day, all of this soil will heat up, and under all this debris will heat up even more because the radiated heat from the sun won't be able to escape. So at night when this freezes over, this will stay warm and thawed out. So the bad guys will have all the way into December before the ground freezes. And that's not good. So you want to clean all of this up. Quickest way to do it with daylilies is with a hedge trimmer. And then just take the whole mess. This is where they're going to hang out. That's all the bad microbes and the bad insects. You want to get rid of them. Now the other reason for cleaning it up now is because in the spring, your new shoots will begin to come up from the crowns here. And if all of this debris is still on the soil in the spring, when you start pulling it all up, you're going to break the new shoots. And each one of those new shoots could be a flower. And you want to make sure you leave enough above the soil line so that you recognize in the spring, when you purchase new shrubs and flowers, that you have something growing here. Now let's talk a little bit about tender bulbs. So by definition, a tender bulb is a plant that will not overwinter in the ground in our climate. As long as these are green, they're making sugar and storing it in the bulbs for next year, which will mean bigger flowers next year. After your first freeze is when you dig them up. But let's dig one up now just to see what they look like. So this was actually a couple of bulbs on the mother bulb in the spring, and it has since grown and split on its own. For a couple of weeks, all of this area will brown out, the stem will break off, and then you can store this in some sawdust in a pail in a cool spot in the basement. By contrast, your gladiolas are a corm, which means it's just a big mass of sugar stored in a ball, and that has to come up also or they won't survive. And then around the edges are smaller gladiola bulbs. We call them cormels, cormel, and these will be plants next year. These will not bloom next year. This will bloom. Anything larger than 1 inch in diameter will give you a flower, but you have to dig these up also. So over here is a bed of Perennial Asters. These are a blue flowering plant. They're very pretty flowers, and I want to propagate them. So before I cut them back to the ground, because this is again a herbaceous perennial that dies back to the ground, I'm going to save some of these seed heads. What was the flower, but inside the base is where the seeds are located. So all of these are the seeds. So what I'm going to do is, right here, I'm just going to stir a couple in and see if they come up in the spring. But I'm going to take a couple of these, take them indoors, save the seed, and next spring I'll plant them indoors and see if we can get some flowers up. Well, I hope this review helped and that you enjoy the rest of your gardening season. Don't forget, if you have any questions, you can email me at mastergardener@rcn.com.